Hello and welcome to Spaghettimoon's UV mapping tutorial. This tutorial aims to get you familiar with UV mapping and applying a map in Blender 2.41. Okay, so what is a UV map? Well, first off, try to think of this map as a flat piece of paper. The UV stands for the X and Y coordinates, just like in a paint program, except for in a 3D package. So instead of X and Y, they're already taken up by the axis. So we're going to use it uses U and V, but to avoid too much confusion when we're moving things about in the UV map, I'll refer to them as X and Y because the hotkeys correspond to those. So how does this apply to an object? Well, think of the shape of a UV map as our 3D object literally unwrapped and unfolded, squashed flat onto a 2D image. Just like you can unfold a cardboard box, you can unfold the geometry to be represented onto a 2D map. And this is where you place your image. The concepts are fairly simple, and there are a lot of programs that do UV mapping, so let's just go straight into a basic UV map in Blender. Okay, you should have downloaded the source files from Spaghettimoon.com along with this tutorial, and they should be in a folder called UV mapping tutorial. Import the toothpastebox.obj, which using the import command here, but I've already imported it, so here it is. So you can see we've got a very simple object with a little bit of beveling done on the edges. Center it up onto our viewport so it's straight-ish, and now we're going to open up the UV image editor. So you split the screen, right click, click split area, there we go, and then select UV image editor here. So we've got half and half pretty much. And now back in our 3D viewport, change from object mode to face select mode, so you go here, UV face select, and you can see that there are faces there that have popped up in our UV image editor. As long as you've got all of them select, press the U key to unwrap the UVs. You've got all kinds of different ways to unwrap object, cube, cylinder, sphere, LSCM. We're going to be using LSCM, which stands for Least Squares Conformal Mapping, which basically means it tries to preserve the proportions of your geometry when going to unwrap, but more often than not it's going to need a little hand, which we'll give it in a second. You can see when I clicked it then we've got this horrible map that we've just created. So once you've clicked it, you see we have quite a mess. Let's go to the 3D viewport again. In fact, let's put it in full screen because that's all we need. Okay. Right. Now we're going to give the LSCM a little bit of help by cutting up our box, by marking the seams or edges. So go into edit mode by pressing tab, and then control tab into edge mode as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to mark up our seams. So just click an edge loop around. I think that one would be okay for the top. And if we do it again for no, we do the top and the bottom. Actually, let's do each side like that. And press Control and E, and then click on Mark Seam, and you'll notice that they turn orange. Now the UV unwrap will take this into account when it goes to unwrap, so let's do the other ends quickly as well. So it's fairly simple. Just select the edges we want around here and mark a seam. I'll go do the same to the other side. Control E, mark seam. That should be fairly okay. I'm doing it like this because we're gonna want this cut up fairly accurately, because it's going to be a toothpaste box, the meaty paste toothpaste. And I think that's about it. Good enough. So what we've been trying to create is outlines that are going to define the shape of our box, which is fine for simple geometry. When there's more advanced tutorial on UV mapping, I'll show you some of the other tools we can use on more complex geometry, but the concepts are essentially the same. Now our object is ready to be unwrapped, so the same process again. We've got all of the faces selected. Press U and then LSCM. Oops, didn't select them. Press U, LSCM, and you can see we do have a bit of a mess there. I don't think we marked them up right. That should be okay. Oops. No, I've made a mistake there. I think I've overlapped some. That's the problem. I missed a couple. So mark that seam up. They've got to be kind of nicely connected. It's like, otherwise it all goes to pot. Damn, some more of them. Oops. Mark seam. Thought I accidentally extruded the edge there, so do these ones. Damn. Quite a fiddly process. Yep, that's them. And last one. Oops. There we go. Mark this seams now. Should be a bit better. Face select mode, unwrap. That's much better. Now we've got each side of our box nicely unwrapped. Our map is looking a lot nicer already, so now it's just a case of lining up these UVs to an image. If you've already have your UVs, for example, if you already had your UVs nicely mapped out, you would want, and you want to texture them in a separate package, you would want to export the lines of your map, and you can do that into a TGA file using a script, and I'll just show you that quickly before we bring in our pre-made texture file, because it's kind of wonky workflow. Normally it maybe make your UVs and then texture. So go to the scripts window and then go to UV and then go save UV face layout, and you'll get this up. It's all fairly self-explanatory. You've got the size of your texture. You might want to make that fairly large, like 1024 by 1024 or 2048 by 2048, just to avoid any nasty discrepancies in the texture. And the wire size, obviously, how big your wire is, and it's I think it exports to as an alpha, so it's just you can layer underneath it or over it. Wraps or scales your texture if it's outside the layout. All faces, or all the faces, or just the ones you've got selected, it'll make a map as, and that button just includes the name of your object in the file, and you just click export and it'll export your UV layout as a TGA file. You can go and edit in GIMP or Photoshop or something like that. Okay, so importing a pre-made texture. Anyway, back to our UV map. Simply go image open and open up the texture that came with this source download, or if you already have the file in your scene you want to use, you can use this little rollout. There you go, image open, but I've already got it loaded up, so meaty paste text JPEG. There we go. And what you can do is put your view type as textured, and you can see a little preview of how the actual geometry will look with the texture on it. Now, instead of selecting each vert of a UV, there's a handy little shortcut called select linked, and since we've cut up the geometry pretty nicely, we don't have to worry about selecting too much other stuff. So if you hold your cursor over different parts, different selections, it'll only, and press L for linked, it'll only select the linked part of your objects. It's very useful. And so really now it's just a case of moving, scaling, rotating our pieces to line up with our texture. So let's do that quickly. And as you can see, this one's going to be our front one, and that's the front. Let's move that one out of the way, which is obviously one of the side ones because it's square. So just G for grab, R for rotate, and if you line it up, or you can just box select, grab some verts, and grab constraint on the x-axis, meaty paste, box select, grab x, that should be about good enough. A to deselect, or A to select all, box select, grab Y, G for grab, and that should be okay. You can scale them, but you probably get it a bit more accurate doing it like this. And as you can see in our viewport, we've got it nicely lined up for that. Really, after that, it's just a very simple case of, as I said, lining up your UVs. If you have trouble knowing which one to select, you can just select them in face mode and it'll do it for you. But I prefer to have them all selected in the 3D viewport so I can see where all the other ones are. And let's just do this one quickly and then I'll render out to show you how to make sure it rendered. That's not quite lined up, so I'll just... There we go. That'll do. Obviously you can do the rest of them in a second. So we'll go back, I'll just get rid of this, I'll bring up the buttons panel. What you need to do before you render is, well, if we render now, we'll put some lights in quickly as well. Oh dear. Go to object mode. And lamp, just add another lamp, that should be fine. Okay. You can see it's previewing in our window, but unless you click, oops, this button here, I'll show you if you read it. Oh dear. And see if it's black. So we want to change that so the texture appears on it. So you simply press this little button here, which sets the UV map to the object. So realise that it's lined up fairly well. You can, and there are some other options you can use when creating a UV layout, which is things like pin, which kind of constrain the geometry for that part where you've pinned and keep the proportions. They're all over here. Pin, you got stitch, which is basically kind of a keeping the vertices in the right place. But for some of these more advanced options, we'll be doing them in a separate tutorial, which will be for our character model, which will be in the future. Meanwhile, I hope you've learnt a little bit about UV maps, and now can apply the basics of them to a fairly primitive model.